What's up, EC's Garage? So quick disclaimer before you watch this video. I did film it with a cell phone camera before I got my GoPro, and I did it, so annoying, I did it vertical, right, portrait. I'm so annoyed. I'm editing it right now. I did this project a little while back, like I said. Annoyed. I'm just annoyed editing it, so I know you're going to probably, it's annoying to watch. So keep that in mind, brace yourself, right? I just wanted to put this out there to brace yourself. Really good information in the video, however, I'm really happy with where I decided to mount it. I'm really happy with the the mounting points that I chose, and I'm really happy with the cooler itself. So watch it, get what you can out of it. Just know that it is vertical and it's portrait. I know I feel the same. Sorry everybody. But I'm going to do a recap. I'm going to do a reprise. I'm going to do a reprise on the installation of this when I'm installing my new Addicted off-road bumper after I rattle can paint it, which you're going to see also. So yeah, I'll have the bumper off, the grill off. I'll go through all the steps. I'll point out what I did, and I'll make it a whole other separate video. But if you're doing this yourself and you're not certain, watch this video because there's a lot of good information. I tell you exactly what I do, and you can see it. It's just a little annoying. All right, so check it out. EC's Garage. Today we're going to install a transmission filter. We're going to install a transmission cooler on a 99 4Runner V6 SR5. In addition to this, as anybody knows, once you start on a project, especially on older cars, I'm talking repairs, I'm talking modifications, you go down a rabbit hole, you got one thing to do, but on the way down, you start replacing parts that need to be fixed, you start doing other maintenance. It's like you saw in my last episode 3 about the ball joints. I basically had to replace one steering tie rod, ended up doing the ball joints, the wheel bearings, and the axle boots. I had to do those, but I got everything, since I was there, it was all apart, get it all done. So transmission cooler, right? Transmission temperatures are very important. Heat ruins transmission. So what prompted me to do this, not just the supercharger installation. I do have a supercharger, and I do have a ton of weight with the armor and the dogs and the gear on the roof, and sometimes a passenger. So I do have extra weight. I need to cool, and I have had temperatures go up. I'll tell you a story real quick. Before the radiator, the 3-row Champion all-aluminum radiator that I put on, before the supercharger, before the armor, I was heading up to Big Bear. I had dogs. Like I said, my dogs weigh 250 pounds together, a little over. Gear on the roof. And going up the 330 uphill, the temperature started to rise. Actually, car was kind of underpowered to begin with, just a little bit. And we'll talk about that in the supercharger video and why I did it, and also go over the installation and review. But going up that hill, I had to downshift, turn overdrive off, yeah. And then I downshifted in a second, kept the throttle on about 4,000 RPM all the way up to maintain speed with all that weight. And heat went up past halfway, in between halfway and a quarter. Well, that's not good. And that was with the stock factory aluminum on plastic radiator and no other weight in the car except for dogs, gear, no other modifications, slightly bigger wheels. So now I've got the supercharger, I've got a rear bumper, I've got full skid plates, I've got a front bumper, a winch, and rock sliders on the way. Dogs still same weight, and I've got usually gear on the roof and sometimes a passenger. Temperatures are hot right now, but besides all that's going to cause heat in both the engine and the transmission. Now I installed that 3-row aluminum radiator from Champion. There were some modifications I needed to do. It's not a direct feed, even though they claim it is. It's not. We'll go over that. Doing the B&M right now. I'm going to show you what it is. The B&M transmission cooler. I got the largest one, and I'm going to install a gauge. So we'll do a separate video for the gauge. So as far as transmission coolers, I decided to go with the B&M 70264 14,400 British thermal units cooling. It's a little bit larger than the others, but it's got the most cooling power. You can see on this little graph right here. I got it from Amazon for $105. Yep, so there's the cooler right here. It came with a ton. So the B&M transmission cooler came with a ton of clips, fittings, brackets, bolts, nuts, washers, and these zip tie things. Came with all sorts of stuff, anything that they could think of that you might need, they just put it in and then doubled up on it, which is really cool. It also comes with this 5/16 inch transmission hose, a little small. So what I did, and also I'm replacing, while I'm at it, I'm going to replace both the feed and return lines. The return line I obviously got to replace because that's going to come off the transmission cooler. I'm also replacing the feed line with this Derale 25 foot. I got this 25 foot Derale 3/8 inch, and it's rated for 300 psi. So it's a little bit hotter than I believe the 250 pounds of psi stock. So we're going to put that on. I'm going to replace, like I said, the feed line going into the radiator, and then we're going to put the transmission coolant after the feed, right? So it's the return fluid that's going through the transmission cooler. It doesn't make any sense to run transmission fluid through the cooler and then back into the radiator so it can go to whatever temperature the coolant, the fluid is in the radiator. It doesn't make any sense. So put the transmission cooler after the radiator. So it'll come out of the transmission, go into the radiator as it does now, then come out of the return line from the radiator into the transmission cooler, and then out the transmission cooler back into the transmission. So I'm probably going to mount it like this. I know if you do it like, you can do it this way. I would put the feed line up top and then put the return line at the bottom if I were to do it that way, but I may be putting it like this. We're going to see. I don't want it to go on the, I'm not going to mount it on the air conditioning condenser. I'm going to do something a little bit different, so we're going to get it apart and see what our options are. Alright, so now we're actually going to get this done. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the grill because it'll give me some more room. I've decided where I'm going to mount it and how. So check this out. So to get the grill off, you've got these little clips in here. They have little compression points on top and bottom. What you can often do is press the top a little bit and then pull this out. That's it, right? Get the next one, bam, pull it out and leave it sit, right? So pull it out and just let it sit against the metal, then move to the next one. Now these are old, they're brittle, and they break, so be very careful. I've actually broken a couple over the years taking this off, so be careful. So you've got 4 up top, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you've got 3 in the bottom. 1 down there, 1 in the middle, and then 1 down there. I use a long thin screwdriver, right? Like I said, you press the end of the clip, pop them out, pull the pull this fitting away, and just let it rest against the metal. Move on to the next one. All right, once you get all of these off, I recommend you pull the clips out, turn it sideways, pull it out, and then line it up with this here, and then take this clip, right, line it up with this, and press that down. That way, when it comes time to put this back on, all you gotta do is line it up and press it back. I recommend you do this, that way when it comes time to put it back on, all you've got to do is line these up with the mounting points and press the grill back on. And if you've got any with a broken end, you see this, I recommend you put that broken part at the bottom. That way, if you ever need to take this off again, you can push down, with a screwdriver onto the top of this rather than going up from the bottom. It's easier to get to from the top. Alright, so now I got the cooler and I've decided where I'm going to mount this thing. So I've seen people do things, like tap off of these already existing, points, and they bolt these brackets in, all sorts of ways. And I've seen other people zip tie the transmission cooler through the AC condenser. I'm not going to do that. I'm also not going to run some brackets off of the hood latch assembly. What I'm going to do is down here, you can see this brace, right, runs all the way across in front of the radiator and the air conditioning condenser. There are holes here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to line up these mounting points on the bottom of the AC, of the transmission cooler with those holes that are already there. I'm going to put washers in the back. I'm going to run a bolt through, right, so the bolt doesn't slide through the hole. So I'll give it some backing, and then I'm just going to put a nut on the front and do it that way. And then so that's the start. So I'm going to get those 2 pieces down, and then I'm going to run a bracket down the top to attach. So it'll have at least 3 mounting points. So let's check it out. Alright, so I'm lining this up from the second hole over from that center radiator support, hood latch support, lining this up here. And then over here, we've got another hole behind that mark I made right there. So I'm going to drill a hole in the transmission cooler to make another mounting point for that. So one bolt will go through here, the other will go through this far one here, which is the second hole over from the brace there. Alright, so now I've got that extra hole drilled, almost like I knew what I was doing, so I can feed bolts through these holes in this lower brace. Those holes down there look like they're about 1/2 inch. So I got to put washers on the back so they don't, the bolt doesn't just, you know, slide through. All right, so I fed a bolt through here with a washer on the back. So the transmission cooler will mount here, and I'll put a nut over the top. Yeah, one thing I want to mention, that if you decide to do it this route by feeding bolts through this brace that's already here with holes in it, at some point on the back of this over here, there's a backing plate welded on here, so you can't necessarily feed a bolt through this because it's right here. You can't feed a bolt through it. It's totally solid. You would have to drill a hole. So I chose to take this hole right here, just one over from the one I chose. So there's second, skip, and then right here. All right, as you can see, I got both the bolts fed through. Now I'm going to line up the transmission cooler, the holes in, you know, the mounting points on the transmission cooler, and the one that I made, and get some nuts with lock washers on them. All right, so got my bolts fed through. You saw I one over from this center support, skipped 2 holes, went to the third. This is where this bracket starts. There's like a horseshoe shaped thing right here, and I can just get this bolt through. So that's where I'm mounting it. So now I'm going to line up the transmission cooler with those bolts and drop the nuts on with lock washers. All right, so I think this is the way I'm going to do it. I've got the a bolt and a nut and a lock washer. All came with the B&M kit. Same with the bolts and lock washers down here. The washers I used on the back side, I had those. They're larger. You're going to need to get some. But this is what I'm doing so far. Now here, you can see this brace thing starts to lean back. So this is a little tilted, right? It's a little angled like that. So what I'm going to do, as you can see now, the holes line up. You can't really see it from the phone, but they do line up. These 2 holes line up. I'm going to put a bolt through here, some washers or a thick spacer, and then a nut and a lock washer on the other side, and call it a day as far as the mounting goes. Bam, there it is. All right, so what I've done here is I put a bolt through, and I threaded a couple of nuts and washers. So I use lock washer on either side to give it the right width here. This kit wasn't made specifically for this vehicle, so you just got to figure it out, right? So I didn't have to drill it excessively. I'm not using zip ties. I like using hardware. So I've got a nut and a bolt lock washer through this existing hole in this vertical hood latch, you know, radiator, you know, support. And I used one of the bracket that came with the B&M kit with the bolt that came with the B&M kit, 2 nuts, 1/4 inch nuts with a lock washer and another nut to secure that. And the bottom, I used my own washers with the bolts that came with the B&M kit, and the nuts and lock washer at the bottom. So I got 2 mounts at the bottom, 1 here, and I think I'm going to call that a day. Now I do have an addicted off-road front bumper on the way. I will install a winch. I don't expect it to affect this. This does stick out a little bit further than you know, the support here. So if it comes to that, I'll figure out another place to mount it. But for right now, this is where it's going. So this is on. I'm going to tighten the bolts down and then work on the feed and return hose next. Now I've got skid plates on this, so I may have to take at least, I've got them on from the radiator back to the gas tank, so I might have to at least take the radiator off first. They did leave a lot of room for access, but you're gonna find out. What I've done over here is I've mounted I've tightened these bolts down, right? Yesterday we mounted this last night. Got 1 bolt here that connects to this center support, and then I got 2 bolts down here at the bottom that are connected to this this horizontal brace. Now what I've done, you can see real quick, is I fed a wrench to the back. You can see the wrench sticking out behind that brace, and on the other side I used this ratchet right there. So I held the bolt in place on the back side and used the ratchet on the front side to tighten both of those down. It sucks, it's tight, but like I said, have patience, take your time, and you figure it out. Alright, now we're underneath the car. This is the return line from the radiator to the transmission. If I were going to only install this cooler, I would only take this off, run this into the cooler on front, run the cooler back to the transmission, and only replace this hose. But since I'm down here and I'm doing it, I'm going to replace both hoses. Who knows how long these have been here. So this return hose, and this here is the send hose from the feed hose from the transmission. This is on the passenger side, so the other's on the driver, this is on the passenger side. Comes off into the radiator from here. This is the feed hose from the tranny to the radiator. Now if you look at these here, they come back to here. These are these two hoses, and they feed right up into here to the metal hose. There's clips on each of these. I don't think I'll have to take off my skid plates. I'm going to try it without, unless it starts making a huge mess. I think this will be quicker. So I'm going to take these hoses off here and replace the rubber all the way back and zip tie them down like the stock here. So here is the feed hose from the transmission to the radiator, and down there is the return hose, and that's what's going to go from there to the transmission cooler. Alright, so I am going to explain what I'm going to do really quick. I will need both hands. By the way, I've got a GoPro on the way to help me film these. I'm going to use a bolt. When I pull that transmission line, the return line off of the radiator, I'm going to stick this bolt down the line, and I've got a box down here to help curb the mess. Alright, so I've got the return hose off of the radiator. It's so it's a fitting. Here's the hose. I'm going to run the hose from the radiator fitting to the transmission cooler now. Also, what I'm doing is I'm replacing the pressure clamps with these screw-on type. Alright, so the next thing I've done is I fed the line, the hose, up from where the radiator's at, under the skid plate, right on top of the skid, between the skid plate and the radiator. I fed it up through this little corner to the cooler and mounted it. Now, you may have different plates, you may have none at all, so you're gonna have to figure out how you're gonna route it and whether you're gonna use zip ties or whatever you're gonna do, but that's how I did it. Alright, so now I've got the return line from the radiator to the coolant, which is gonna go out from in from this hookup, out this one back to the transmission. So I've got this routed through here in front of the skid plate, back, inside of it. Down here, there's the old line hanging off, and I've got the new line connected right here. So I've got a little slack, it comes back this way, inside the skid plate, and then up between the skid plate and the radiator. Next, I've got to run a line from here down the passenger side to the transmission to replace the old return line, which is dangling right here. Now I could just connect this, if it, I think it may reach to the exit line of the transmission cooler and be done with it. But like I said, I'm down here. These hoses are a little soft. I don't know how old they are, but they're going to be replaced. Doing it right. Yo, so also, so you know, what I do is that I'll run the hose up where it needs to go. In this case, I'm on the passenger side. I'm going to go up inside the skid plate. There's a little room in this corner here in front of the radiator. I'll come up, and then I will connect it to the return line for the from the transmission cooler right here. What I'll do is I'll run the hose up, and I'll just put it snug, and then I'll come back here, right, and I'll take the other end of the hose to where it needs to go. Make sure I've got enough room, take it where it needs to go, which is just right here. Make sure I have enough room and enough slack, and then I'll cut the hose, and then I'll attach it. That's how I do it, because I've got this whole 25 foot. So I run it from one end to the other, then cut it and attach it. And that's what I did to the other side. I ran the hose up from the driver's side, return line to the transmission cooler, snugged it tight on the transmission cooler, and then ran it to the radiator in there. There you go, down there, you can see it. And then once I got a pretty close estimate, I'll cut it there and then snug it, tighten them both up, both clamps, and I'm done with that side. So that's what I'm doing again. All right, quick update. So I've got the all right, so easiest part of the project, right? Coming off of the return side, return from the radiator to the transmission, coming off of that side into the transmission cooler, easiest part. What I ended up doing here, I ended up feeding this hose down into the skid plate and back. There's a little gap in there. It was just enough room for me to get this in. The hardest part so far was getting up in there and pulling off the lines that hook to the metal hoses, that connect back to the transmission. That was the most difficult part because there's not a lot of room. I do have skid plates, engine, transmission, radiator. So taking them off, I didn't really feel like there was going to be a whole lot more room, so I didn't. I made a little bit of a mess, but I got both those hoses off, and I got the return hose connected. So the return hose is now replaced. The last thing I have to do here is replace the feed hose from the transmission to the radiator, which is this one closest to us on the passenger side, and it's probably like 18 inches of hose. That's the last piece. That's the last part, and this project is done. All right, finally done. So the hardest, like most suckiest part of this was getting to those hoses back there behind, above the upper control arm there inside the frame, where they connect to the steel hoses that go back to the transmission. Further back there sucked. This part here, where this closest line to the radiator and the furthest line down there, and also mounting this and hooking the lines of this, easy, right? So you don't have to necessarily replace the feed hose that goes to this line here on the transmission. You don't necessarily have to replace that. I did it because I was down here, and it's always good to have new hoses. Like, what if one of those broke? Who knows how many miles are on it? I also replaced the pressure clamps with regular clamps with the bolt and screw head. So those are on tight. I'm going to start it up and see if it hopefully doesn't leak. All right, so far so good. No leaking from the transmission cooler or the radiator on either side, or where the hoses connect to the hard, hoses. Nothing, no leaking. So I'm gonna let this idle for a little bit. Clean up in here since I got some transmission fluid that spilled when I was taking these lines off back here. They suck, but it's done. I won't have to do it again, hopefully ever, until I replace this engine, and then it makes a whole different job. But for now, that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. I got a ton of hose left. If you want to do this project yourself, let me know. Alright, so it's been idling for 10 minutes, no leaks. I'm going to get up and drive it right now and see if I can put it under some pressure, under some load, see what happens. Going to clean my tools up, clean up my area, my driveway. Didn't make a huge mess on the driveway, which is good. I got those cardboard, most of the transmission fluid, which wasn't a whole lot. Pulling the hoses off of the radiator, there's a fluid in there, capped it really quick. So I got most of it. When I got the hoses from the rubber hose where it meets the metal hose that feeds back to the transmission, when I pulled those out, definitely there's not a lot of room in there to work. It leaked a little bit into the skid plates, so that's running off right now. I'm gonna pull it out into the street, put some paper underneath it. I don't like using chemicals, environment and that, but I am gonna use some brake cleaner, clean that off really well, and then take it for a drive. Like I said, I hope this helped. Your setup may be different. You may not have skid plates. It might be easier for you to get to. But, and also, like I said, this kit isn't made specifically for this car, so you just got to figure out, have patience, take your time, and figure out the best route for things. And as long as you know the fundamentals, right, the basics, the feed side, the return side, the radiator, transmission cooler comes after the, the return line, right? So you don't want to feed the cooler fluid into the radiator. You want to come out of the radiator, into the cooler, back in the transmission. Pretty simple. Hopefully this keeps temperatures down. I will install a gauge. That'll be a separate project. I know usually I like to do these at once because I'm down there, but we'll make it separate, we'll make it fun for you. I'll talk to you guys next time. EC's Garage, I'm out.